going to be doing a gather. And when we do gathers, typically it's taking a large piece of fabric and bringing it down into a smaller piece of fabric, used a lot in decorating and costume construction. So we have to do some imagination for the sample that we're doing. And we're going to imagine that our window is 36 inches long. We're going to make a curtain for it. And what we would want to do is at least double the window size. So instead of being 36, it's going to be like 72 inches. Imagine this piece of fabric at 72 inches in length. What you're going to do is you're going to set up your machine, going back over to your straight sewing, pressing the plus button, putting it up to 4.5. You're going to line up your stitching with your regular foot, and we're going to run this foot even with the top of our fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to just stitch this across with no back stitching. You're going to do a second row of stitching, and I should mention when you cut this off, make sure you leave string. We're going to do a second row of stitching, and we're going to line up the edge of our foot with that first row of stitching so that they're going to be 1/4 of an inch apart. And again, leave extra string. And what we're going to do is we're going to fit this to this piece. And so we're going to take our threads, and the first thing you're going to do is you're going to separate them. So either take the top 2 threads or the bottom 2 threads. And it doesn't matter which ones you choose as long as you stay consistent. So I'm going to take my top 2 threads. And what I'm going to do, because remember, we're imagining this at 72 inches, we're going to pull this all the way to the middle. And if it was actually 72 inches, we really couldn't go any further than that, because the worst thing that can happen with gathers is that you break your thread. So I'm going to pull on these threads, and I'm going to bring this all the way over to the middle. Then I'm going to go to this side. Again, I'm going to separate my threads. And I chose to use the top threads, which I often say is the pretty side of the fabric. I didn't choose the back side. You don't want to switch them up here, because then when they meet in the middle, they form a knot and break. So we're going to take this, and we're going to pull this thread. We're going to pull this all the way across. We have a little snag in there, so just pull this one here. Once you get this pulled, we want to make sure that it's smaller than the piece that it's fitting to, because once it relaxes, it expands. And if you go just the exact size, all of a sudden it's too big. And then you end up pulling it. It's kind of a game that you end up playing. So we make it smaller than it needs to be, and then we're going to put our right sides together. Typically, this would be the side you like to sew on because it's nice and smooth. But this is the side you need to sew on because it's a mess. So we're going to take this and just kind of pull our threads out of the way here. And we're going to match this up with the edge of our piece that we're putting it to. We're going to put our pin in, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to figure eight it around our pin. What that does is it anchors my gathers so they're not going to stretch any bigger. But if I was doing something that, let's say, was 17 feet around, and I got to the end and I found out I had all this extra and I needed to pull it tighter, I could take out my pin and those threads would still be ready to pull. So it anchors them, but it doesn't lock them to the point that you can't adjust your gathers if you need to. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take this side and we're going to just pull this to adjust it to fit. And you just keep pulling and pulling and pulling until you get it so that it matches and both pieces fit. We're going to put a pin here and do the same thing as you did on the other side, where you're going to take all your threads and figure eight them around the pin. Once you have those, you're going to adjust your gathers, because right now there's no gathers, then there's a bunch. So we're going to slide it on here, just to kind of adjust it. And when they all look fairly even, we're going to put a pin in the middle. Now the thing with gathers that you want to do is when you're stitching them, you want these gathers to line up being perpendicular. By doing the 2 rows of stitching, you can see they kind of automatically line up, kind of like railroad tracks, perfectly perpendicular. If you only put in 1 row, you can see that these are going every which way. So it's an aid to you to be able to do the 2 rows to get them to adjust. We're going to put our machine back on 2.5 because that's our permanent stitching. We're going to bring it over to the machine and we're going to line this up at 5/8. When we do that, it's going to be in between the 2 but not exactly in the middle. So we're going to stitch this and back stitch again because that's the permanent. And again, we want to make sure that these are laying perpendicular. So we just kind of tug on them a little bit. Make sure as we're doing it, they're staying nice and smooth. And then just back stitch at the end. Now, once you're done, you're going to take out your pins. And there's your gathers. Now, manufacturers lots of times will leave this row in because time is money to them. You're going to want to take that row out. So we're going to take, again, we pulled these on the pretty side of the fabric. So I want to take my thread. I'm just going to pull on that side of the fabric to pull that thread out. And there's your gather.